Hello, folks. Welcome back to another installment of Monthly Insights with our good friend David Bishop, partner at Brick Meets Click. David, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm okay. So I have a few questions for you. I'd like to get your comments on regarding April 2022 numbers that were just released. What are you seeing in the most recent analysis that indicates price inflation is having an impact with respect to online grocery sales?
Yeah, so obviously, as you know, Mark, we reported that we had a drop, about 4%, a little under 4% on a year-over-year basis.
Yep.
Um, Obviously, inflation is top of mind. We're seeing just incredible persistence with this elevated kind of once in a lifetime level of price inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't have at the time of we're talking today, we don't have the latest CPI figures from the government. They come out in a day or two. But as we look at things, we can just see this persistence that really started about 6 months ago, right? In terms of accelerating this inflation. And now, if we just look back at a March with just simply food at home, which put context to it is about 3/4 of the grocery component, because there are others like personal care, alcohol that aren't included in food at home. But that's 10% year over
Mm-hmm.
year. Now, we don't know where it's going to fall quite yet for April, but the fact that it's been elevated close to 10% for several months. You overlay motor fuel, even though motor fuel is a much smaller component of share of household spending each month. We are now lapping incredibly high inflation rates from last year with fuel that were 50% higher in 2021 versus 2020. And we're still close to 50% in 2022, lapping that impressive rate from 2021. So, consumers are seeing signs everywhere that things cost more.
Right. Yep.
And that has that kind of that persistence of that inflationary signal in the grocery store or at the pumps, when you're paying your rent or your mortgage, your utilities, has this effect on slowing spending or changing behaviors in ways. So, in one way, we can see fewer people going online. Um, but it's not fair to attribute that entirely to inflation because, again, after all, we are now moving into an endemic as from a pandemic. Of course, now there's talk about increased caseloads in the fall as we get to the next
Mm-hmm.
variant that we deal with. So again, this is just an extremely challenging time to really make sense of all the moving parts, right? I mean, as we come out of that pandemic induced kind of lockdown, people have more confidence. Obviously, we've already seen the reversion back to long term patterns. Grocery tends to be a little stickier right now, so we didn't see as much of that whipsaw. Although it's a little harder, as you know, you and I chat when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about these numbers. Grocery isn't the entire universe that we're looking at in this monthly. This is where households spend their grocery dollars outside of grocery, which includes mass. So, again, a lot of different factors playing in there today, and we can talk a little bit more
Yeah.
about some of the specifics.
Yeah. Just before we do that, I can't recall what the piece of research was, but it came out recently, and it said that consumers equate grocery price inflation greater than the actual aggregate number reflects, at least in their minds. So it's certainly, and it could be because of the high touch, high recency element that they feel grocery is exceptionally exposed to inflation, or at least
So,
perceived.
yeah. So think about it today. If you looked at share of household spending, so this can include mortgage or rent, all the way to motor fuel and anything and
Mm-hmm.
everything in between. Grocery, and again, we're talking just food at home now. That's about 33% today
Mm-hmm.
of the share of consumer spending. Compare that to a year ago, it would have been about 25%. So, it's not hard for consumers who typically are buying a fairly consistent basket of products to notice this persistent inflation, because when they check out, they realize, gee, I didn't buy as much, but I spent more. And that has that ongoing kind of persistent effect as to changing behaviors, whether it's switching to smaller sizes, whether it's switching from a national brand to a national brand equivalent in the form of a store brand, or in the case of online, switching the means and methods by which you receive those online orders if you still find that an acceptable alternative. Some people may find it acceptable, but now affordability becomes an issue and they're making trade-offs, right? Between delivery and pickup, or even between pickup and shopping inside the store. So again, not surprising that we're seeing a little bit of a pullback. The month over month is actually not as bad as it would have been last year. In other words, we would see a typical seasonal shift between March and April, and we've seen that this year, but it's not as significant as what we saw last year. So that's a promising sign. And with all the other factors that are out there, the numbers in that context, under 4% pullback on online sales, is actually a pretty positive result given everything else we're talking about.
Yeah. So what else are you seeing that might be instructive for conventional grocers in terms of this dynamic between assortment, convenience, and cost?
Yeah, so one of the things, and we've talked about this offline, just really underscores the point of know who your customers are and underscore your customers, right? When we're looking at this, what we see is, yes, cost is becoming a more important consideration in terms of where people shop online and how they shop online. But when you then break it down in the way we do by format, let's take mass versus grocery, we do see some very distinct differences. So while it's true that cost has become more important, it's also true that it's much more important for the customer shopping with mass than it is with grocery. So whether that means grocery has to get more aggressive on the price and cost components to compete with mass, or it means that customers are shopping grocery for different reasons, which is one of our hypotheses, then mass, you can take away two different things, because ultimately we understand that if you're not the low cost provider competing on price or cost as your central kind of strategy, is not going to necessarily bear the type of fruit that you would like, recognizing that the low cost provider is the one who's going to stand to gain. And right now we are seeing mass probably a little more insulated than grocery because of the price perceptions with the lower cost to serve aspects, both relative to the price of the products that they're buying, as well as the cost associated with using the online shopping services.
Another question that jumped out at me in the report this month. What do you make of the widening gap as measured by repeat intent between first-timers and more frequent users of online grocery services? You said that the gap is widening.
Yeah, so I think thematically there may be a thinning of the herd that's going on. I think the positive thing is part of the gap is growing, I believe, if my memory serves me correct, because those established customers, and they're defined as customers who have used a specific service 3 or more times within the last 90 days. And their willingness or likelihood to repeat within the next 30 days has increased. That's really important because that is the core base of the business. So it's showing that acceptability is strengthening. And again, keep in mind, this is a larger base than it was pre-pandemic. Now, the first timers have always lagged significantly those established customers, because as we've talked about before, Mark, the first time customer has really very little, if any, familiarity with the platform they're going on for the first time. And again, we define first time as this is the first time they're using it within the last 3 months, right? So it could be that they were on 4 months ago and they've come back, or it could quite literally be their first time. In either case, all the technology, the search algorithms, the personalization, all the things that can enhance the shopping trip aren't there. Past purchases helping populate the basket and make it quicker, quite literally quicker and easier to complete the ordering component is not there. So all those things are the same. What's different today are, again, Some of those people are maybe not only laggards to coming online, but their motivations for coming online were driven by the pandemic. And so they're more curious to see how it works, but they haven't yet really uh, been strongly attracted to the proposition, and the acceptability is still to be determined from their standpoint because, is it cheaper? Is it quicker? Is it easier? Does it remove frustration? Those are the components, and it could be in the ordering process. It could be in the receiving process. And keeping in mind, their expectations elsewhere are shaping their expectations with the grocers that they're going to for the first time. So I think what we're just seeing there is maybe a softer landing relative to those fence sitters.
Yep.
We're not seeing a full-on, run for the exit, so to speak. But again, because of the importance of buying groceries week in and week out, there's still a high level of interest. Just the level of commitment or acceptability for that group just seems to be waning a little bit relative, especially relative to the established group.
Yeah, and that really makes a lot of sense, David. So one question not necessarily tackled in this month's Insights, but it's something I wanted to get your opinion on, which really revolves around the rapid contraction or implosion of what we would call ultra-fast delivery, quick commerce delivery providers, and what potentially are the implications for conventional grocers. What should grocery retailers be aware of?
So I think it's a really good point, and I would actually widen it and say it's not simply conventional grocers. It could be the mass retailers. It's this fixation, or what we considered in a month ago, this infatuation with faster speed, shorter cycle times from the point someone had ordered to the point they receive. And, we have believed for a while that has been a somewhat misplaced belief in the idea that acceleration, that is faster delivery in terms of shorter cycle, is what the customer wanted. What we believe and have evidence to support is that it's more precision, that customers want to know when they're going to receive it. That increases their level of control and certainty. And precision is defined by the waiting time. So in delivery, instead of having a 4-hour window or a 2-hour window or even a 1-hour window, a premium can be applied to delivery from the customer value perspective by shrinking that wait time. Because in effect, if you have a 1-hour wait window, receiving window, in theory, you may have to be around for an hour. And again, we keep saying we're a broken record. Yes, most deliveries are unattended today, but that's only relevant if there aren't temperature sensitive products, if they're not age regulated products, and things of that sort. So people are still going to be around because they're not going to want to leave their groceries outside, especially get in the warmer months. So when we look at this rapid or ultra fast delivery, we understand that it was access to capital, and the capital was in search of higher rewards and willing to take higher risks to achieve those rewards because of the low cost of capital in a low to no interest environment. That's changing, and what we can see both with the major VC and private equity groups, as well as some of the beneficiaries who received that money, is there's been a quick reckoning this year in terms of a pivot toward profit. And I think that orientation of putting profit over sales is really important because that aligns with the way the traditional brick and mortar retailers, whether you're mass or grocery, have looked at the business. But frankly, all of those brick and mortar retailers have been really struggling to understand how do we move forward, specifically because the media has given so much attention, in effect, of filling the sales with even more attention that kind of created I'll say a vicious cycle, because it drove more retailers into this path of really pursuing an ultra fast delivery that, for all intents and purposes, no one has yet figured out how to make profitable.
Yep.
And then the real question is, does the consumer value that enough to pay a premium? And we have yet to see evidence of that, while we have seen plenty evidence to support the fact that customers are willing to pay a premium for precision as opposed to acceleration.
Right. Excellent insight, David, as usual. David, let me ask you quickly, do you have any questions for me?
What are you hearing / seeing from both current as well as prospective customers in terms of solutions, thoughts, in terms of how they address this online area?
I think grocery retailers are, in particular, very concerned. Well, maybe concerned is too strong a word. They're in need of information for where this market is going, because they're coming into planning cycle, and their executive boards are asking for some guidance. So I know we're getting requests for what are the sales figures going to be come later this year. What are they going to be next year and the year after?
Wow, that's interesting, Mark. That seemed like a softball question or a layup for me, because as you know, we are getting ready this month to start up our sales. We're restarting our sales forecasting. We haven't done it since 2019. We paused it in 2020, 2021 because of the volatility and the uncertainty. However, given the data points that we've been seeing and the settling, the stabilization in the market, we feel comfortable that now is the time. And like you, Mark, we've had the same questions. In fact, we had someone say, "Oh, I saw the April results showed that the online came down. So does that mean we don't need to invest in online?" And
right.
I don't think anyone should overread 1 month's results. This was a single company we had conversations with, and look at the longer term trajectory here. And all indications are we are reverting to the slow and steady climb, but that we're not necessarily going to see some precipitous drop back to pre-COVID levels. And I think that's unique in grocery. We have seen that in other areas, but I think other analysts have rightly pointed out that there were factors. So in home furnishings, one of the reasons why there's a pullback in a real retracement is that there were stores that were physically closed during the pandemic, and the only way you could buy was online. And that wasn't the case here, because grocers have always been considered essential retailers. And so the dynamics are so different. But I think it just underscores, again, going back to understanding who your customers are, why they shop with you, what are the reasons why they shop with you, both in store and online, by the way. Where are you positioned in your market from a competitive standpoint, and understand the strengths and weaknesses. These are fairly straightforward questions. And then it's the capabilities. What are the capabilities we have or want to have to define and develop that unique strategy? And again, strategy isn't really hard. It just requires you to make choices. And the most important choices are which ones not to pursue. So rapid grocery or rapid delivery is an example of one that most conventional grocers, if they really looked at it, would probably say this is not necessarily in the target zone, let alone the bullseye of the customer value proposition where we can win.
And to your point, David, I really think strategy is not dictated quarter by quarter, let alone month by month.
I think you're right. And then I think also is if we're going to retest our assumptions, which we should be doing on a regular basis anyways, whatever that interval is, annually, quarterly, is, are the things that we believe to be true still true? A lot has changed in the last 2 years. And we can see with the stock market, there were a lot of people who thought some of this was going to go on forever, right? And now they realize it's not, and we've seen some significant pullbacks in those pure plays or those really tech-exposed kind of growth stories. So now we're kind of resetting those expectations. This is exactly the time when the retailer should be looking at the investment strategy for the next 3 to 5 years and seeing where and how they can win, because we're now, especially with the pullback of easy money, we're going to probably see a little more rationality in the market, which is a good thing. A return to profit over sales is an orientation that every brick and mortar, I think, will celebrate, because it's hard when the other guy puts sales over profits and doesn't have to answer for the fact that they don't generate any free cash flow, let alone any
That's a great point.
profits.
That's a great point.
Right?
That's a great point. Really appreciate it, David. Until next month, folks, we want to do more of these, just that David's incredibly busy and hard to get a hold of. And he doesn't always take my calls.
Well, I may be busy. I'm not incredibly hard to get a hold of. I may block you at times, but that's just not a necessity.
Understood.
The restraining order did not work, so we had to go to the old-fashioned block.
It doesn't go cross-border. All right, David, till next time. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Adios.